The Columbus Metropolitan Club was founded in 1976 by 13 women leaders who wanted to be included in the community conversation. I am Sally Bloomfield, and I was one of those 13 women. Having been left out of men's clubs that focused on community issues, it was a priority for us to make the club 100% inclusive.
Today, CMC presents public policy forums every Wednesday at lunch with average attendance of more than 200 people. I'm Tony Bell, and I frequently attend forums, which are open to everyone and present relevant, current, and newsworthy topics. I'm grateful that CMC is nonpartisan and presents many perspectives on every topic.
I'm Jane Scott, President and CEO of the Columbus Metropolitan Club. CMC is open to everyone. We invite you to explore the personal and professional benefits awaiting you at the Metropolitan Club. Welcome to CMC.
Welcome to CMC.
Welcome to CMC.
Welcome to CMC.
All right, on to today's forum. With the sweeping changes to the NCAA's name, image, and likeness rules, big changes are coming to the world of college sports. Ohio Governor Mike DeWine recently signed an executive order allowing college athletes to earn revenue using their name, image, and likeness. So, are amateur athletes still amateurs if they can sign contracts like the pros? What does this mean for athletes, teams, families, sponsors, and higher education? And will high school athletics be next? Our expert panel will dissect the issues and the implications of these game-changing new rules. Introducing our panel today will be Bob Tanis, Managing Partner with Porter, Wright, Morrison, Arthur, LLP. And you can find more about each of today's panelists in your forum flyer and online. Bob, podium is yours.
Thanks, Doug, for that introduction, and thank you to the Columbus Metropolitan Club and its leadership for putting on these great programs and these great forums. Porter Wright is very pleased to sponsor today's program, and we're excited about to hear what the panelists say. Porter Wright is a full-service law firm, started in 1846, so we're celebrating our 175th year as a firm this year. Excited about that. We have 8 offices in Ohio, Chicago, Pennsylvania, Florida, and Washington, D.C. So with regard to our sports law practice, I met Luke over 5 years ago and sort of immediately fell in love with his energy and passion, and I know that for those of you who know him will feel the same, and we'll get that today. At the time that we started talking about developing a sports law practice, really our goal was to become one of the country's leading law firms representing athletes before, during, and after their sports careers. To get there, we really saw the importance of education as a really important foundation to the work we do, alongside with our legal representation. Today, Porter Wright represents high school, college, professional, and retired athletes in all of the major sports across the country. So we're well on our way in terms of having that national reputation. So if you know Luke, as he's often fond of saying, let's do this. So let me introduce the panelists. Luke Fedlam, who's president of Anomaly Sports Group and chair of the Porter Wright Sports Law Practice. Next to him is Kristin Ronai, who's the Director of Compliance at the Ohio High School Athletic Association, and Roger Ingles, who's CEO of Executive Management Partners. And then also our host today is Roger Oller, who's the Columbus Sports columnist, Columbus Dispatch sports columnist. So I will turn it over to you, Rob.
Good afternoon. We're going to have an interesting and fun time this afternoon. Listen to these experts. Need to start where everything does start with NIL, it seems, on Twitter. A recent Twitter poll responded to the question, what is amateurism now? And does it exist? 47% of the respondents said no such thing. that amateur athletics, nearly half, no such thing, 20% pre-college, you're an amateur if you're pre-college, and then 33% was anything without a hard salary, hourly or salary. So if you're not getting paid directly to play, that would be amateurism. So we're going to start with the hardball question first for the three panelists. What would you say amateurism is? Is it changed? Is it what it always was? What's your views on amateur athletics? Take it away, Luke.
Okay, so we're going to be here for the next hour talking about amateurism and what it is. But no, I think probably the best way to articulate amateurism at this point is I think it's a bit different, right, than pro athletes in the sense that pro athletes get compensated for their performance in their sport, right? So they earn compensation for actually performing in their sport. And I would say that amateurism is where you have athletes who are not being compensated for their actual performance. They may do deals that make them professionals, and we'll get into the name, image, and likeness side of things, where players may do deals that they get paid and they become business professionals. But as it relates to their sport, not receiving compensation is a great place to start in my mind.
That's a great perspective, Luke. From the perspective of the Ohio High School Athletic Association, just a little bit of background. We are a nonprofit voluntary organization of OHSAA schools, so they elect to become members, and our rules are created based on a membership vote. So I actually have the definition that I'll be sharing with you that our member schools have decided as it relates to amateurism. So an amateur athlete is one who participates in activities of his or her sport for the purpose of deriving the physical, mental, and social benefits organized sports competition has to offer, and not for any present or future commercial gains. Since the student is considered a member of the student body, a clear line of distinction between educationally based athletics and professional sports must exist and be maintained at all times. So exactly what you said, we want student athletes at the high school level to really be engaging in sports for those benefits that interscholastic athletics can provide for them, and not for any payment or that sort of thing. But that could certainly be changing here in the next coming year. So we'll talk about that here shortly.
Getting to the question of amateurism and is it around, I don't think true amateurism has been around for quite a while. If you've been following the Olympics, there's 13 athletes that have won medals at the Olympics that entitle them to $315,000 in compensation from the Olympic Committee. All of those have college athletic eligibility left, and all of them are okay under old rules to take that prize money. So I think our definition of amateurism at the college level has changed tremendously over the last several years, and the Olympics have been one place where that has happened.
Great. So I was a Ohio State sprinter back in the day, 35 years and 40 pounds ago, as I like to say. And I would have loved to have had NIL back then. But where does it stand? Everyone thinks football, basketball, but I guess 53% of the NIL so far has come from outside football and men's and women's basketball. So over half is what you would call Olympic sports. In my day, we called them minor sports. You can't call them that anymore, I don't think. So where is the opportunity for the non-football and non-basketball? You guys can comment on that.
From my perspective, I would say that social media absolutely changes the game for those minor sports, as you so referred to. These student athletes can accumulate followings, which are in the hundreds of thousands, even in millions, especially in a sport like gymnastics, where they do these routines that really get that social interaction engagement. So I think that changes the game and really opens up that door for student athletes in any sport to be able to recognize these opportunities from NIL.
And I'll say, too, I think it's important that we actually understand really what NIL is, right? So name, image, and likeness. It's the ability for a student athlete to license their name, image, and likeness to a third party in order to receive compensation, right? So that's kind of the technical definition, but the way the NCAA, i.e. college sports generally have kind of talked about name, image, and likeness. It's actually more than that, right? It's the ability now for student athletes to earn compensation in ways that they haven't been able to earn compensation before. So yes, you might have the situation of a student athlete licensing their name, image, and likeness in a traditional sports marketing type of agreement that we all see pro athletes do and that we're familiar with, but it's also the opportunity for student athletes to start nonprofits, to start entities, for-profit entities, to sell a product or a service, to do speaking engagements, appearances, to do more than just the traditional sports marketing type of agreements. And so because of that, it opens itself up and lends itself to much more than just your traditional kind of revenue-producing sports that we would assume. And to Kristin's point, if you look at, I think it was 2019, I don't know if the numbers are out yet for 2020, but the college sports team that had the highest social media engagement across the country was UCLA women's gymnastics team. And so understanding that and thinking about social media as a starting point for name, image, and likeness, or at least one of the primary starting points for name, image, and likeness, shows you how that engagement by athletes is what's important, not just necessarily the sport that they play or even necessarily the number of followers they have. Brands are looking for the engagement that they actually have with their following.
Yeah, and I would just add that every student athlete has a following, okay? They all different size, but they all have a following. It may be a family, it may be their local community. As they progress at the higher levels, it's, a Buckeye Nation, it's other groups. But everyone has a following that they can appeal to, and therefore everyone has the possibility to be creative and innovative and come up with some sort of NIL program or process that can afford them the opportunity to make money.
And I think when that intervention did start to take place, you saw these posts on social media of, I am a Division III baseball player. I want to put out there that I give businesses my permission to use my name, image, and likeness. Please contact me. So students recognized that immediately and wanted to put that out there.
Great. We just had a front page story on Ohio State football players signing autographs for pay. I'm just curious, you guys are the experts. If you're a college athlete, what's the best way to proceed? Do you dive in? Do you wait and see? What would be your advice for, you can break it down too if you want, football or lacrosse. How would you go about it? What's the key and central to this, the most important thing? Because we've seen football players make deals that were pennies on the dollar when they first jumped in. And now I'm wondering, do they regret that?
I think if all of us in this room said, you know what, so as Roger said, we all have a following. If you want to follow me, I'm at Luke Fedlam, just as a side note, increase my NIL value. But what I'll say is, if all of us in this room had the opportunity, right, to do name, image, and likeness, we would all have to figure it out for ourselves in the sense of, do I want to do it? If I do want to do it, how do I want to engage in it? And I think that's the question that student athletes are facing, because a lot of times from the outside looking in, we assume that all student athletes want to participate in name, image, and likeness. And that's actually not the case. Some want to focus really on their sport. Others aren't sure how they might engage. So if I'm answering your question, I want to make that broad statement first that there has to be a decision as to whether I want to engage and how I want to do that. And if I do decide that I want to engage, there are a lot of different ways. It depends on what do I want to do with the name, image, and likeness. If I want to do autograph signings or, just make as much possible money as I can, then there's a path of doing that. If it's that I want to make or engage in valuable opportunities to me and limit my engagement so that my time can still focus on my studies and on my sport and my performance within my sport, and so maybe I only want to take certain activities or name, image, and likeness opportunities, then my path might be a little bit different. But I think the key here is that this is really up to the individual student athlete to go through that process for themselves to figure out if and how I want to engage in name, image, and likeness.
I would add, Rob, with that too, is that a lot of student athletes right now are asking questions about what can I do, what can't, what does this allow me to do? And I think it's important that the colleges and the universities set up a strong education program. If they can't do it themselves, then bring in an outside source. There are some great companies out there. I know Luke is aware of one. But there are companies out there that work both on the university side in terms of educating student athletes and what it is they're allowed to do, versus those that work with the student athlete trying to find promotional opportunities for them. The big question that I think a lot of people have asked is, how much these student athletes understand about what they're getting into. Do they understand tax laws? Do they understand the role of a contract and what that does for them? And when they do make a deal, what's that do to them liability-wise? So I think there's a lot more to it than just a student athlete saying, "Hey, there's great opportunities, and we have to be creative and innovative to find ways." They've got to find ways to. We have to find ways to educate those kids into doing things the right way.
Luke, you had a great, if you want to share it, you had a great little story there with the car. Do you want to, can you share that just as an example of the lack of information or knowledge that's out there?
Sure. So, we were talking at the table earlier and just share this into Roger's point about, student athletes really don't understand a lot of this. We were speaking to doing an engagement with a Power 5 school and their basketball program, and we were on Zoom presenting to the team, their coaching staff, and then we also had parents on the Zoom as well. And the question came up by one of the student athletes that said, "Hey, what about car deals? How do car deals work? Like, I might want to do that." And so I asked, like, does anybody in here kind of know how a car deal in a traditional kind of sports marketing type of scenario, how it works? And nobody really knew how it works. And so I shared about how it's typically a lease. It's for, usually a year, maybe 2 years. And the owner of the dealership will make those lease payments. And they're like, "That sounds great." I'm like, "Yeah, it does." Until we start talking about the fact that you get taxed, right, on what they paid on your behalf, right? So that's one thing. And then two, insurance. Let's talk about insurance, because they're not leasing you the 2009 version, right, of a beat up car. They're going to lease for you a 2021, a 2022 model, and you're a college student. So your insurance is going to be through the roof. And the best part of the conversation was they said, "Okay, well, I'm on my parents' insurance, so my parents are going to just pay, right?" And the parents are on the Zoom like, "No, we're not." Like, and I think that just gets to the point that people, like, there is so much education that has to occur. I mean, just with all of us, right? It's new. It's new to college athletic departments. It's new to parents. It's definitely new to the student athletes. It's new to the coaches. So there has to be some education to help prepare them so that student athletes end up in a better spot when they leave school, since we know 98% of them are not going pro, that they're in a better spot when they leave school than when they started.
Do there also need to be guardrails? That term has been thrown out. Does the Congress need to get involved in this, or is it the opinion of you three that it is individual by conference, by school, by state? How do you think, how do you see this playing out, and how does it need to play out? Again, does there need to be a federal, federal regulations to keep this thing a level playing field? Yeah.
I'll start with that. Yes, there has to be guardrails. And no, the NCAA is not going to do anything until Congress acts. Okay? The NCAA basically threw their hands up and says, "Okay, you guys wanted it, you got it, you figure it out." That's basically what the policy says. The Congress is going to either have to give the NCAA an antitrust exemption, which is what they're asking for, and that's what they've been working on, or they're going to have to pass federal legislation on NIL that is in place across all 50 states, because right now you have a number of states that have NIL legislation and a number that don't. And the NCAA has told those states that do not have NIL, "You guys figure it out at the school level." Okay, so you're putting the fox in charge of the hen house in some cases, is they can figure it out. But until that happens on a federal level, we're going to continue to have this wild, wild west mentality out there where everybody's trying to do their own thing and nobody really knows what they can and cannot do.
Do you think legal action, no matter what happens, is going to continue, even if the federal government steps in? We're not going to see the end of legal action, correct?
No, and in fact, I think one of the latest cases with the Supreme Court just filed some amendments. The lawyers just filed amendments citing the case, or the comments from the Alston case, which took away the NCAA, basically took away the NCAA's antitrust standing that they've been living off of for the last 30-some years. And I think lawsuits and law firms like Porter Wright are going to play a big role in this as we move forward.
Just tell everybody that. We can keep that going. That'll be great. But I will say, I think it is important, right? You've got to. There will be a national standard, because let's just look at the last 8 months, right? So we're August 3rd today, right? So since January 1st of this year, We went from a place where that next week the NCAA was supposed to vote on their name, image, and likeness regulations that their working group had worked on for a couple years. So we thought, okay, we're going to have a national NCAA imposed rules on name, image, and likeness. On January 11th, a couple days before they were supposed to vote, the Department of Justice said, hey, don't take that vote because we think that there are some significant antitrust issues here. So then it went to states now saying, okay, well, Florida is supposed to go into effect July 1st, so now we need to make sure that we catch up so that we aren't left behind in a recruiting and retention battle, right, so for student athletes. So now states are all coming in, and so at the last minute, we all saw it in June and May and June where states, either through executive order or through past state legislation, said, okay, we're gonna do this, and we all thought it was gonna be a state-by-state issue. And then because of the NCAA versus Alston decision, the NCAA said, we're going to take a step back, and schools, it's on you. And so now we're in a place where we thought it was going to be a national plan with the NCAA. Then we thought it was going to be state by state, and now it's literally an institution by institution. There can't be a competitive balance if what we're looking for is competitive equity. We can't have that if every single school has their own plan, because to the point earlier, it is in certain respects the fox guard and the hen house, because who's actually doing the enforcement? Because the NCAA is not doing the enforcement when it comes to name, image, and likeness, because it's a school policy. And therefore, ultimately, for schools to say, hey, that this recruiting, kind of battle that we're all in is fair, there's got to be a national standard.
Okay, you're talking in some ways about unintended consequences here. And this one's for Kristin, this question. You've got Quinn Ewers, has given up his senior year high school in Texas to come to Ohio State. That's probably an unintended consequence. You're at OHSAA. How do you deal with this? What is your opinion on this? And you guys can chime in after she's finished.
Absolutely. So from a high school perspective, the biggest tangible thing that I'm able to point to is there's going to be a big discrepancy now between schools that elect to become members of their state association and schools that don't, as in prep schools. Because now these prep school coaches are able to sell to these student athletes, hey, you can come to our school, we don't have any amateurism guidelines, you're gonna be able to make hundreds of thousands of dollars if you come play for us, where if you stay at your local public school or local non-public school that you grew up in, you can't do those same things anymore. So it's really going to draw students away from those interscholastic opportunities that they have, which is a difficult thing to digest. Previously, those NCAA standards were level across the playing field, but because those have gone away now, those prep schools and non-state affiliated schools really are on a different level. So we've not had a year to experience that yet, but I will say this upcoming school year, there's going to be a lot of engagement with our member schools to see how do we want to address this moving forward. Because I guess kind of contrary to what you said, Roger, we want our member schools being the ones to make these rules. We don't want our state legislators to force these upon our member schools. Obviously, they have excellent insights and are going to be included in those conversations, but we really want our member schools to be the ones who are making these rules that their student athletes are abiding by.
And I would add, Kristin, that the NCAA created this mess by part of their interim policy is that prospective student athletes can participate in NIL. So that opens the door for kids that are at schools that are, the parochial or the non-public schools to participate. And I think right now, I believe there's only one state that allows it for a student athlete at the high school level to participate. And as you mentioned earlier, they can't participate using the high school's logos or images or trademarks, but they can participate in California. And it seems like California is the state that kind of kickstarts everything. I mean, they were the ones that kind of kickstarted the legislation on the NIL to begin with, and now they've kind of kickstarted it a little bit to create a rush at the high school level.
I think it's important, too, to be honest about where we're at, though, as well, right? And it's easy to point out a particular individual that, could make a lot of money, and so he's foregoing kind of his senior year, but he's met all the academic requirements to be able to graduate early. We've seen that before name, image, and likeness. Student athletes have been able to do that before name, image, and likeness even became a thing. Student athletes have been able to, if we're talking about football, have been able to finish their high school senior year season, graduate, so that in January they can enroll in the school that they want to go play in. So we've already seen this before. That has happened. So now the difference is we're talking about dollar amounts associated or potentially foregoing their last year of playing at the high school level. But what we're going to be talking about for those who do that is typically those elite of the elite who will have the opportunity who really want to enroll as early as they can so that they can get the training, the development, and be 1 year closer to making it to the pros, right? I mean, that's partially what it comes down to, especially on the football side. So yes, money is involved, and that changes things, but at the same time, this isn't something that is just brand new because of name, image, and likeness. It's been around and been happening for a while.
Isn't that part of the issue, though, is that we have viewers who's like the 1% that can do this, but that doesn't mean 50% think they can't, right? There's the danger. It's who's in your ear, who are you talking to, who's counseling you. This is where education comes in on another level. Yeah. What are your thoughts on that? Do you foresee, I guess, try to project and speculate here, where do you see it headed? And
yeah, so to that point, it's actually a great point, right? Because we know statistics have shown that only 2% of college athletes play professionally, but when polled, and I think the last time I saw this was 2018 or 2016, over 50% think they can play professionally, right? So you've got this kind of tension there and whatnot. But at the end of the day, I mean, that's a bit about what college should be about. Right? We know the money that's in college sports, and we could talk about that for the rest of the year. Every Wednesday at noon for the rest of the year, we could talk about the money in sports. But we don't have that time, and we won't get that programming. But the key, though, I think, is to recognize that this is what college is supposed to be about, educating and preparing young people for the next step in their life. If their next step in their life is to be a computer programmer, great. College should prepare them for that. If their next step in life is to be a professional athlete, great. College should help prepare them for that and give them the education and the skills necessary to be able to be successful as they navigate these waters. I truly believe that name, image, and likeness is a conduit to provide meaningful real-world education to young people who might otherwise not care about it. Right? If we're being honest, if we can now say, hey, you should take this digital storytelling class, you should take this marketing class now because it could impact you and how you could potentially earn money, then absolutely let's use name, image, and likeness as a way to get that education to young people who need it most.
There seems to be, two levels here. There's a sky is falling side, and then there's nothing to see here side. Let's take this down to the locker room level. How is it going to affect team chemistry? I know that's been that kind of gets talked about around the water cooler or whatever. Is that the offensive left tackle or right tackle gets X and the quarterback's making 10 times that. How does that affect? Does the tackle just not block as well? That seems like a crazy thought, but I mean you hear that out there. There's all kinds of stuff being talked about. Is that a legitimate concern in terms of maybe not with in the NFL with 30, 35-year-olds who are mature, but with an 18-year-old, if it does come down to the high school level, a 19-year-old freshman in college, is there so much money that it's not a big deal, or is there potential for this being a big deal? Who wants to tackle that one?
Yeah, the potential's there to be very disruptive. I mean, Urban Meyer was one of the leading proponents against NIL. For a long time there at Ohio State. And part of it is that the complaints you hear from coaches is it's going to upset the locker room. It's going to create culture issues. It's going to, create the haves and the have-nots within our own team. That's something, coaches have been dealing with culture issues for a long time. It's going to be a factor in recruiting, let's face it. When Nick Saban stands up in front of the Texas high school coaches, knowing that he can't use NIL as an inducement to attract kids to Alabama, but says, hey, my incoming freshman quarterback has got a deal for, almost 7 figures already. Hasn't played it down. It's going to be used. Kids are going to end up going to places where they think they can make money, and the transfer portal is going to explode. Because you know what? You make a whole lot more money when you're starting than when you're backup. And, the situation in Ohio State, I hope those 4 kids all stay here and all graduate in that quarterback room, right? They're talented kids. But when they see somebody making this money and they're starting and I'm 4th string and I have an opportunity to go someplace else where maybe I can get a little bit of that pie, what's going to happen? And the transfer portal's already made it easy. So that's part of that locker room culture is how do you keep kids involved in your program? How do you keep them from leaving? And there's good and bad. I mean, I've seen both sides of it, Rob. I was not a proponent of it at all for the longest time, and now I see that, you know, student athletes should have this opportunity. But how we control it is still up in the air. I mean, that's the question.
I think one of the unintended consequences, too, that people aren't talking about is how these contracts with these student athletes are going to impact the relationship they have with the school that they're attending. So at the college level, there's all of these endorsement deals and contracts with what sport uniforms you have to wear. That's not necessarily as exclusive at the high school level. And if a student enters into a contract that says, I have to display something on my uniform, the current law in Ohio says it's okay as long as it doesn't conflict with a contract already signed by the university or college. So if that high school doesn't potentially have that same sort of contract, are we going to have student athletes with little emblems on their uniform because it's not in conflict? So it's really important, the way that these rules are written, to consider all those different factors, because now you have a family who is fighting against a school because my contract says I'm allowed to wear this emblem, but you're not letting me put it on your school uniform.
Yeah, I think the locker room question is an important one, but I think sometimes it's blown out of proportion. Locker rooms have been, you've had the starters, the stars, the people who always get all the press attention, media attention, the interviews after games and things like that. So coaches have had to deal with that issue in the locker room, you know, forever, right? And so let's not discount also the players themselves and their kind of how they view the value of what they're actually doing every day. Are they going to say, I'm not going to block him because he's making money and I'm not? No, right? Especially if they're part of that 50% that think they can go pro. So they want as much, you know, as good a film as possible and all that. And they're performers. That's what they do. They perform on the field. That's what they're there for. But the other part is this. It's the coach's job. It's their job. They get paid a lot of money. In 42 of the 50 states, the highest paid state employee is a college basketball or football coach. Right? So we know that they get paid a lot of money. So guess what? For that money, this is another part of your job. Deal with it. Figure it out. Educate. Right? You're getting paid big bucks to do that. So it's part of your job. Make it happen. Sorry, I got a little fired up. My apologies.
That's what we're here for. How about back to, before we move on here with questions, level playing field. Roger, you talked about it. Does Ohio State in Columbus, almost 2 million people, opportunities, how much of an advantage is that to even a Purdue or a place, or a smaller school? Does NIL, or NIL as we're calling it now, I guess, does that just make the rich get richer?
Well, we're already dealing with that. I mean, we have, you know, top 5 programs in the country, you know, Texas, Georgia, Oklahoma, Ohio State, Alabama. They're already rich and they're already getting richer. I mean, so does it give the others an opportunity to compete? Yes. But I think it's something that is just part of college athletics right now. You know, where I'm mostly concerned is what's it do to the small schools who just went through budget cuts, who just cut programs, who cut coaches, and now are looking at, I've got to have compliance for NIL. And how do I do this? And they can't afford to hire the outside groups. They can't afford to hire a staff member like, you know, Tennessee or Stanford or whoever does. That's where the difference is going to be. It's going to be in how they are able to best serve their student athletes.
Great. Okay, so it is CMC's tradition to take audience questions. This is the fun part. Jane Scott of CMC is curating questions from the live stream audience and for in-house audience. That's you. Please keep your questions brief and to a point, and have it be a question, not a statement.
All right, great.
What is our first question?
Yes, some really good ones. Roger Blackwell, does the institution in which the student is enrolled have a right to a portion of what the student receives? And I guess the other piece of that question, if I can expand on Roger, these kids are getting scholarships, and now they're making $1 million. Do they forfeit their scholarship?
The NCAA's answer is no. The university can't be a part of their arrangement. But what they can do is they can sign an agreement with a company like Brander that allows, or open source, that is dealing in group deals, where the university allows the student athletes to use their trademark images and their university marks. But the university is, for instance, uniform sales. The student athlete could get a cut off of those now, okay, with their name and their numbers, which they couldn't do before. But the university can make money from that group deal, but not from just a separate single individual deal the student athlete has.
I'll just add to that real quick, because that's absolutely right. Schools will only be able to share in what a student athlete makes to the extent that the school is a school that allows the licensing of their marks and students to be involved with that, and therefore they would simply just receive their ongoing compensation as it relates to the license of their mark.
Hi, I'm Bill Lafayette. I own Regionomics. I'm an economist. And my question is, there's a tremendous potential, it seems to me, for these young people to get scammed and exploited. And I'm wondering if we've thought that through and if there are good ways to prevent that from happening.
I would say that some people have thought that through. And it's very much a reality. And we're having those conversations all the time. But I think the challenge is that the way this all came about with name, image, and likeness, in providing defense of the institutions themselves, they were told, literally a couple days before July 1st, that they had to come up with their school's policy because, following the Supreme Court ruling and different things, the NCAA was saying, we're not going to come up with the solution. And schools, you have to. So that's a lot to deal with, right? So you've got COVID that schools are still trying to figure out, and how do we continue to have a season and plan for the fall, dealing with now this new name, image, and likeness that as a school, we have to figure out what's our policy. There are legal components to that, significant legal components, as well as trying to think about the pressure from coaches and others to make sure that it is something that is favorable to student athletes so that they can recruit student athletes, that also, because of the transfer portal, they can retain their student athletes and not lose them to another school. So there's a lot going on there. That's not an excuse. It's just offered up in defense of what's been happening. But we have been kind of shouting from the mountaintops because, having worked with pro athletes and seen how pro athletes have been taken advantage of, it's very easy to see. And there have been many articles written about the number of companies that have just popped up just because of name, image, and likeness. And people who think that, they can come up with deals for players, and I'm going to find you the best deals, in Columbus and things along those lines, and try to get players to sign with them. So absolutely, there is a high opportunity for student athletes to be taken advantage of, and the only way that you combat that is with education.
I would echo that as well. When this legislation passed, there was a lot of influx of messages to our association of how does this impact high school athletes. The current answer right now is none, but we have had those name, image, and likeness companies who are trying to do things the right way, who reach out to us to get that clarification so they know how to work with Ohio athletes. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen with every company, which is why that education piece and just exercising an appropriate amount of due diligence, hopefully the parents can help guide these student athletes through that process, but takes a lot of education.
So there are a lot of good questions. Mary Urena asks, with social media available to all college students, why are the resources of a university about NIL education only in the context of student athletes? Wouldn't all students benefit? And I guess I would ask another question. We had a forum a few years ago about the esports, and those folks were exploiting the heck out of all the promotion and advertising, and it doesn't seem like they even fit into this mold at all.
I would say that there is a lot of, I guess, misunderstanding, especially at the high school level, and I'll go back right there because that's where I live, about the relation of esports and chess club. That's an exaggeration, but that aren't really covered under any of these rules. So for student athletes who are for students who are attending colleges that might not play a sport, as long as they are not violating those licensing agreements with the colleges, they are able to make money off their name, image, and likeness, even if they're just a student at that school, as long as they're not exploiting the colleges and universities' trademarks.
And the listener who asked the question is spot on, right? Which is, yes, name, image, and likeness education would be great for all student athletes. All students, excuse me, right? All students. But non-athlete students have been able to start businesses, sell products, market themselves, forever, and it's just brand new to student athletes. And we know, based on the earlier question by Bill, which is there's a high likelihood of risk of someone being taken advantage of student athletes in particular being taken advantage of because of their celebrity status and the dollars involved. So that education is critical to get them first. But yeah, absolutely, this education should be for all students.
Denny Vincent, and my question, well, a thought and a question. I'm thinking about the rich quarterback and the poor old left tackle, and thought about what happens when you finish a round of golf at a country club. You have somebody comes up and clean your clubs, and you give them $5, and there's 2 or 3 of those people doing it, and typically at the end of the week, they pool the money and split the tips. So I'm thinking, if a coach is trying to really keep the team together, could there be a solution where you take the rich quarterback and the pennies tackle and throw the money together, and the team benefits as a team from all the money? Just a question. So,
University of Pittsburgh's quarterback signed a deal with a local downtown hotel and restaurant to promote them. And as part of that promotion package, his compensation was they were going to feed his offensive line once a week. Okay? It's a great thought. That's part of that pooling concept. So kids are kind of doing that on their own. It creates the question of who pays the tax liability. Is it the quarterback or is it the lineman who eat the meal? And so there's a lot of issues that are going to go into things like that. Do you see it happening? Yes. Miami of Florida. Every football player is receiving $500 a month from a apps group, right? So they're making $6,000 a year, 85 kids that they signed a group deal with. So that's an example of creative ways that you can do that. Is it going to happen without major legislation? Probably not.
So Carol McGuire asks, OSU will soon sell jerseys with current student athletes' names and numbers on them. Looking at this and many other revenue-generating activities, what's the larger scope and scale that this might create?
Right? I mean, the sky's the limit. It's only, name, image, and likeness is limited only by the creativity that people have to come up with new ways of doing things. And what I think is important, and this goes back to kind of our earlier conversation around just the fact that this is a school-by-school policy and that a national standard will need to be figured out, which is what you see and what we're seeing now is just 3 months ago, across the country, schools were adamant about the fact that student athletes will not be able to use school marks in any type of promotion for name, image, and likeness activity. But then you have one school that does it, and then what happens? Other schools say, well, we got to do it too. And so you have one school that says, hey, we're going to allow student athletes to participate in jersey sales and get, licensing and opt into a licensing type of, model. Then, of course, you're going to have other schools that will do that. So we're going to continue to see that happen. And at some point, there will be a national standard around what this looks like that will help to say, okay, at least all schools are on the same footing in terms of what they're going to do within this name, image, and likeness space.
Ann Gabriel, Ohio University retired, and I was the faculty athletic representative for 7 years, worked with the MAC and the NCAA. And so I think you've kind of alluded to this, but more specifically, we still think of name, image, and likeness as Power 5, and football and basketball in particular. So my question is, how do you see it impacting the Mid-American Conference and the other Group of 5 conferences in particular?
Likeness is going to work for anyone who wants to engage in it and has the ability to engage in it. So, quick example, Chloe Mitchell. Chloe Mitchell is a volleyball player. She's now going into her sophomore year at St. Aquinas College in Grand Rapids, Michigan. That's an NAIA school. So NAIA actually passed name, image, and likeness a year prior. And so she was a high school senior during the beginning of the pandemic, started on TikTok with just a couple followers and created a she shed and just, chronicled this whole turning her, garage or the shed in the backyard into this like lounge area and gained about 3 million followers because of it, right? And so she went in, over this past year, she's already been making money on name, image, and likeness because of it. So if we're talking about the elite of the elite athletes who do traditional sports marketing opportunities that we're used and accustomed to seeing, then yes, we're going to mostly see revenue-producing sports or big celebrity college athletes at usually well-known schools that are going to be able to participate in it that way. But as we said before, there are so many other ways that you can engage in name, image, and likeness that if you have the following, it almost doesn't matter necessarily what school or size of school you're at, you're going to have an opportunity. Because through social media, that's for anyone, right? So it doesn't matter geographically if I'm going to Creighton University in Nebraska or if I'm here at Ohio University in Ohio, right? You'll be found, and social media, folks who want your social media influencing will find you.
So my question's about the larger city markets. They clearly have an advantage because they have more companies with more marketing money. How do you see that playing out?
I would answer quickly that that's one of the things that scares large athletic departments to death, right? We've got coaches making $6 million a year in football. We got coaches making $3 million a year in basketball. And there's only so much money out there for marketing and advertising, right? So a lot of the ADs were scared to death that if Nationwide, for example, has $3 million in advertising money and they decide to put $1 million of that into student athletes, that's less money the departments are getting. So I think what is going to happen is you're going to either find out that this name, image, and likeness is working and businesses decide to put more money into it, or they're going to find out it doesn't work and they'll go back to the older style of marketing and advertising.
And that size of market is an interesting one, right? Because in the example that Roger used is Columbus. So Columbus is a great market if you're thinking about name, image, and likeness because of the companies that we have headquartered here. Same thing with like an Austin and some other schools that we could, cities that we could think of. The largest markets with, your New York, Chicago, Miami, Atlanta, they're going to be fighting with professional athletes who are in those cities taking on marketing deals and things like that. So unique that certain cities are going to have a unique opportunity to engage in that way.
Hi, I'm Melanie Farkas from Porter Wright. I'm really curious, will universities be able to clear or regulate the type of products or events that students can be a part of? So there's a big difference between an athlete putting their face on a fundraiser for a children's hospital versus, the Lion's Den. Is that something that universities are going to be able to clear? Who wants to address the Lion's Den?
The answer is yes. And so schools right now actually do say what their guidelines are, and they put in their guardrails, and they say you can't participate in certain things. Alcohol is one that schools treat differently. Some schools say no alcohol. Ohio State, for example, and some other schools say no hard liquor, but beer and wine, if you're over 21, you can participate in those type of name, image, and likeness opportunities. Adult entertainment is an area that's forbidden in most schools, as well as like NCAA banned substances. So if there are already banned substances that the NCAA has for student athletes, you can't promote those as well. So there are some guardrails. And then some schools, like BYU, has some really unique ones just based on the type of school that they are. So schools will set what those parameters are, absolutely.
And gambling's a big one.
Yes,
no gambling.
exactly.
Cannot promote gambling.
Isn't this kind of laughable considering the kids that sold their rings for tattoos? Never mind. So will the schools impose a grace period for compliance because the offenses are going to be happening and they're going to be done innocently and the rules aren't even going to be there to say what they did was wrong, but after they did it, somebody's going to go, oh, we should have thought of that. So will there be sort of a grace period to learn this?
I think everybody's asking for grace right now, right? I mean, honestly, the schools are asking for grace because the student athletes are like, I want to do this or I want to do that, and schools are trying to keep up in real time with what they're doing. And at the same time, again, enforcement on this is at the school level, specific to name, image, and likeness, not impermissible benefits, which is different. And we always make that clear. If you are a student athlete, you can earn compensation if you're providing a service. If you're not providing a service, it's still a violation, right? So, but as it relates specifically to name, image, and likeness, that enforcement is happening at the school level, and schools are trying to kind of balance and figure that out. So there's no formal grace period per se, but they're all trying to figure out, okay, if somebody does violate our guardrails that we put in place, what do we actually do? And now it's school regulated. So are we going to bench or suspend a particular player for a particular sport? It's going to be a school decision.
I think one of the most likely scenarios is your top quarterback goes to a local restaurant and the owner comes over and says, hey, this one's on me. Just mention this on your social media. Student athlete walks out the door, doesn't report it, and then the school's got to deal with it. They have to deal with that now. So I imagine they'll deal with it the same way that we've been dealing with violations like that.
I'm Carol Looper. Two-part question. Would the rules about that affected Tattoo-Gate be different now under these rules? And secondly, I remember when I was a reporter talking about supporters were not even allowed to buy a Coke for players. Does any of that in the student handbook change?
Sure. So I'll take your second one first. The supporters piece is kind of like what I said before. So again, you're still in that same place. We're still in the same place as we were before with the rules, that a student athlete, impermissible benefits, that still is in place. And so if you're just buying student athletes something, whatever that is, a Coke, a meal, taking them to a game or whatever that might be, that's still prohibited if they're not providing a service for you. Now, if they end up sending out some social media posts about that, that's different. They have to report it and disclose it. The other piece around Tattoo-Gate, I can't get into the particulars there per se, but again, the key in name, image, and likeness and what makes this difference is that the student athletes, have to be providing a service. They have to be doing something. So it's a bit apples and oranges. I know that it comes up a lot, just like Reggie Bush and his Heisman, and now that these rules are changing, but it's different because we're saying, hey, student athletes, just like other students, if you provide a service, you can receive compensation, and therein lies that contract, if you will.
I just want to say thank you. I think on behalf of all of us, we want to say thank you for being here today. My name is David Corey. I'm the Executive Director of the Bowling Centers Association of Ohio, and we've been talking today from the university's perspective and also from the, I guess we call them student athletes, but they're really athlete students. But what about from a business's perspective? What would be your recommendations for a business who wants to get involved in this? Is that getting with the sports information department at the university level, obviously talking to the student athlete directly, but what are maybe some guidelines you could give for businesses? Thanks.
The university has pretty strict guidelines in terms of what they can do to help promote the student athletes. I think the best thing, there are several really strong organizations out there that work on behalf of the student athletes that you can get registered with and work with the university-sponsored groups, whether it be open source, register with them. Influencer is another one that works with universities. Icon Source is one that works with on behalf of the student athletes. There are some good groups to get involved with that way. Just do some research and find out the organizations that have and there's not going to be a lot of track record, but that have some advice, and then ask people, like some of our panelists up here, who have they worked with or who would they recommend that a business go to if they're interested in trying to engage what I refer to now as the business student athlete.
And I think I completely agree. The only thing I'd add to that, as Kristin mentioned earlier, right, most athletes these days are saying their DMs are open. So if you don't know, that's direct message on like social media platforms. That's just an easy way for student athletes to communicate with business owners and others, and that's how people are reaching out through their DMs. But the other key thing that I'll say too is, again, thinking about what works with your company's brand. Right, so a lot of times people are thinking about, and this goes back to some of our earlier questions about the star quarterback or the star receiver or star basketball player. But I've had conversations with business owners who've talked about, you know what, I want to focus on, and he said I could share this information. I used to work at Scott's Miracle-Gro, Central Ohio company. I was talking to their head of marketing, and we had this conversation about name, image, and likeness. He was like, you know what, I'd rather, instead of we could go out and get any celebrity sponsor we want to, I'd rather have a student athlete that cut grass when they were a kid, right? Somebody that, played football in their backyard where their grass they had to take care of their grass and trim it just right to play a good football game on it, right? Because that's authentic to our brand. And so when I think companies remember that of what type of student athlete would be authentic to our brand, that creates opportunities, because now you're not competing to get that star quarterback or that wide receiver or whatever it may be. You may be looking for that student athlete that can really speak to the mission of your business, the mission of your company, and bring you followers or at least additional attention, which is why you're putting money behind it, in a way that's beneficial to the business.
And real quickly, just To take this opportunity to use this platform, I guess businesses don't contact student athletes at the high school level just yet. So that would be my advice in that regard. It certainly is coming, and if there is that interest in the future moving forward, it would be the school's athletic administrator or principal that you would reach out to. But don't want to waste this opportunity to put that reminder in there.
All right, well, I hope you found today's forum concerning, exciting. I'm not sure where all of the above. Okay. Please make plans now to join us next Wednesday as we follow up today's forum with one on critical race theory. Buckle your seatbelts for that one. Our thanks to our forum sponsors, Porter, Wright, Morris, and Arthur, LLP, and the Columbus Dispatch, and to the Emergency Response Fund of the Columbus Foundation for presenting our live stream in partnership with the Dispatch and PNC. And thank you to our online virtual seat patrons, and a special appreciation and thanks to our speakers, Bob Tanis, Luke Fedlam, Roger Ingles, Kristin Ronai, and our host, Rob Oller. Can we have a round of applause for them, please? Again, thank you all for joining us. We could not do this without you. We look forward to seeing you next Wednesday as the Columbus Metropolitan Club presents another community conversation. Thank you and have a great day.